Is this thing on? Oh, there it is. Great. Hello. Hello. Great. Thank you. Exciting to be here. Okay, so I'm Marijke Jorritsma, and joining me today for this conversation on AI and product design is Chris Reardon, Creative Director, Head of Product Design, Responsible AI, ex-Meta. We have our very own David Hoang, co-host of today's UXDX sessions, design leader, co-founder, and angel investor, and Keyvan Azami, enterprise AI engineering lead at Google New York. So let's welcome everyone here. Thank you. We're excited to be here. We know that this is an exciting topic. Probably the most difficult part of preparing for this panel has just been keeping up with the news cycle, which seems to be changing every day. So just to kind of scope this conversation, provide some context, we're going to be focusing specifically on how AI will provide or may transform some of the roles and opportunities that we have as product teams, and how in turn we may have new opportunities or even responsibilities in terms of how we consider the human component of these new workflows. So that's what's kind of the scope of the discussion today, though I'm sure it will go all over the place. Okay, so just to get started, I'd like to start off with you, Keyvan. You've been working in enterprise AI for Google, so you're working behind the scenes developing tools for AI developers. Okay, so curious to know a little bit. I know a lot of people have become aware of AI through tech demos like ChatGPT, Midjourney, these kinds of things that have become available to the public and for people to play around with and start thinking about how they might use them. But I'm curious if you could share a little bit about the kinds of other roles and maybe workflows that are happening behind the scenes in enterprise AI at Google.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think that first of all, I think that the advent or the acceleration of this technology is only going to be additive to people's roles, to designers, product managers, engineers. And I think that the kind of thing that we're seeing is an opportunity to really rethink the way businesses run. So my job, along with my team, is to help Google run better and more efficiently and effectively. And to do that is looking at how our processes have organically developed and how we can kind of introduce AI to the various business functions. But the interesting thing is that you can't just add AI, throw AI in there. You have to think about the implications of it. How do humans work with it? How do users interact with it? How do we explain and interpret what AI decisions are? AI, comes with uncertainty, and it works on probabilities. So how do you manifest those probabilities into user workflows and kind of deal with exceptions and sort of the higher level functions that humans can provide? So there's a lot of, I think, interesting and complex ideas that it could bring to the table, and I think that it just creates new avenues for folks in these different functions.
Yeah, I think this is something that we've kind of connected on because the work that I've done at JPL has been a lot in modeling and simulation. And so NASA has a long history of performing simulations, and so we seek to make building, augmenting models more accessible to our user base, who are scientists and engineers. And so this is something that you and I connected on, and I think is something I feel like I don't hear people talk about a lot. And so I was wondering if you had some interesting thoughts about some of the work and considerations around the future of the future teams who are going to be supporting model building.
Right. Yeah. So I think the sort of the new models and the new model architectures that we're hearing about have a lot of capabilities, right? But do we understand their limitations and sort of their risks as well? Because there are some, right? And in this new world where we're trying to bring in, engineering, product design with AI, now we need to kind of really preempt sort of some of these gotchas that we haven't really experienced in real life, right? What we're seeing is sort of the the cool side of it, the kind of the great things that it can do, but we haven't actually developed a large body of data points, in how these are used. So the teams that are designing these things need to be thinking about these implications. What are the privacy implications? So if I train a model on my data, a large language model, or if I give it prompts that using my data, is there danger of leakage of this data back into broader use cases that I may not want to see? How do you address bias remediation? These models have learned from human output, right? Whether it's content on the web or whatever corpora of data that you fed it. So do we understand? Obviously, there's a lot of research in this space, and I think Chris is the expert here. I'm sure he'll talk about it. But so we need to kind of think about how do we bring that into the fold.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I'd love to build on that, what Keyvan was saying. I think the role of design is going to change a little bit. It's not necessarily about the UX UI as much in the future as it will be about how an intelligent system actually makes decisions and recommendations. And so really where design is going to move to is thinking about how the brain, the AI thinks. And in terms of like working with our engineering partners, using methods like service design to kind of track back on seeing something that might be a negative outcome in a system and figuring out where in that overall process of building it, that error or that missing piece of information might be housed. And so kind of trying to dive into that and understand that. I also think design is going to be more rounded out with other kinds of roles like ethicists and philosophers and other kinds of roles that aren't typical, because when you're thinking about something that is intelligent, it's not necessarily design systems in terms of UX, UI, where buttons go, typographic grids and so on is going to really make much of a difference on those decisions.
And David, you have just recently announced that you've become head of design for Replit, which is congratulations, by the way, which is developing tools for people to help people develop and code for AIs. Yeah. You must have some insight as well about how this might change the roles of the developer.
Yeah, it's interesting just to kind of build on these points here. Going from Webflow to Replit, it was like no code to like a lot of code, so it feels like a different change. But I think to what Chris said, I think a lot's going to change, but a lot's going to be the same too. Because I think when I talk to designers, they're so nervous about I don't know how to write Python. How do I design for AI and make a space here? It's systems thinking, right? It's in the AI, it's a lot of IA and a lot of systems thinking, and it's just really once you get a sense of the implications, you can start thinking about interactions and manipulation too. And I do think we're still in this very early moment of how we design and manipulate applications. I think and I think there's two ways to approach it. You can go from tech to then the customer need, or kind of go from the customer need and understand what the tech can do. You kind of want to go play the best of both worlds too, right? You don't want to lean too hard in one area. So what we've seen at Replit is people building AI applications because the robustness of the dev environments are just pretty jarring. So it's a place for people to get started and build their ideas. And we have a feature called Ghostwriter that helps you write your code as well too. So all of a sudden, something that was unapproachable for someone writing Python, they can start building applications using these sort of underlying systems to really understand what these interfaces might look like.
And how do you think in terms of just developers or any member of the product team that's going to be working alongside an AI that is helping them, how is that going to change? What kind of skills do we need, or what does that change if we're not necessarily needed to be the expert of developing the code itself? And this question goes for anyone here.
Yeah, I can start with my thought. It's like, someone told me, it's kind of a joke. It's like, this is the time for like the generalists. It's like their time to really shine because now they have so much leverage. Or if you're like me, people who are just like really good at Googling stuff, I feel like you can be really great with ChatGPT. And I think, for me, this is like the dream I've always wanted. And I think this is what like a lot of UX DX really embodies, is that it doesn't matter if you're a PM, designer, or engineer, like you're all builders and starting to work towards that. And I think that world becomes more real based on like the capabilities you have as a team. So, I think there's a lot of like role shifting, right? Like we may be doing different things. Like I think there's a world where brand designers might play more of a role as product designer because of having a lot more leverage in this space. Maybe product designers are leaning more towards like, the engineering side. Maybe it's now true, like designers should code because like it code completes for them. And so there's a lot of shifting, but I'd be curious, like, what the group thinks about some of those implications.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an amazing time for creativity and allowing people access to building things that couldn't do it before. I think the focus then moves from just from building things to why are we building things, and are we building the right things? Are these things that help society? Are they helping people? And trying to be a bit more mindful about the future of how these things might impact us. And so I think design needs to move more into that space of considering the sort of ethical implications of things, civil society and human rights, those kinds of things. So it's less about necessarily pixels and more about how the outcomes of these systems might impact people.
I want to give this audience some tangible takeaways from this conversation. Specifically, I'm sure there's a lot of people who are wondering how do I start to understand some of the terminology, which we've all discussed lacks definition in many ways, is still changing as we speak. How do I start participating in this conversation? Do I need to sign up for an AI ML course, an Open edX, or what are your thoughts about developing your skill set in this area?
I'm happy to chime in. My team actually ran an internal training course that I think was attended by 17,000 people at Google on, large language models, and and it was sort of a non-technical talk, and our goal was to educate folks on, hey, where did this come from, right? And language models have been around for a while now, but how did this become what it is today? What are the capabilities? What's the myth? What's the fact? What are the limitations? And show them, how to, sort of access it. I mean, this type of stuff exists on the net, so I recommend folks kind of, look at some of this, the resources, whether it's offline or online resources, and develop a bit of an intuition for what these models are. And in general, there are a lot of resources, books that are non-technical and talk about the different facets of artificial intelligence and machine learning in a conceptual manner. And so look for those, and they can kind of give you. I think that the key word that I want you to take away is kind of developing a bit of intuition for the technology, because that's what we do. Like in my conversations with my team, we talk about a new development, a new research paper, and we try to understand what they're trying to do and how to kind of wrap our arms around it.
Yeah.
I think for me, I can kind of start with like what I don't think you should do, and it's
work backwards.
Yeah, work backwards from there. And I think, and I'll tell you why. Right? It's like if you play around with like Midjourney all day, it's not gonna help you improve your skills, and it's fun. And I do that a lot. But I think the point I want to get to is like think about like what the capabilities are, like what are the heuristics and patterns that you see from playing with Midjourney. Understand like what generative AI is, and then like get a sense of like, okay, what are some of these other use cases, like Copilot, assistive, some of these other things, and then like in the spirit of dog fooding, like looking at your own product or your own company that you're working at, and seeing like what those use cases are, because I'm pretty confident that like these patterns and heuristics are going to be different across the industry and across like some of the things they are. So I think just like really kind of like have that critical thinking and try to kind of break down like what patterns work and what do not. And a lot of my work is on the application layer, so I'm kind of biased towards that. But that's my thought.
Yeah, I'm going to chime in here with my UX designer hat on. So for me, I think familiarizing myself and doing the research to familiarize myself with key technologies, terminology within this domain, so developing my mental model. And some of the ways that I've done that are by joining, for instance, like JPL has a data science reading group. And so we get together, we read articles on data science. Definitely takes me 5 times longer to read those articles than the other people in that group who are data scientists, but it also gives me an opportunity to sit down and look at all of this terminology, like what do we mean when we're talking about this Monte Carlo simulation or this large language model, like what is the history of that? So that as a designer going in, I have some semblance of what the bounds of this conversation and this technology is capable of. So that's been my sort of approach. I'm curious about you, Chris.
Yeah, I think everything that all of you have said is spot on. I think one of the things I talk about a lot, and we've talked about this, is transparency. I think transparency is obviously, you can use it as a technical term, like how easy is it to understand how a model makes recommendations, what's the documentation, all that kind of stuff. But there's transparency in being involved in this work and working in teams and being able to just comprehend what is going on. And so if everybody's not on the same playing field, you're not going to get the best out of your team. And so being able to make sure that everybody in the room is brought along and has the same understanding, shared values, and so on, that can really help accelerate this. And if you don't have certain expertise in the room, can you try and articulate those things in a way that everybody at least agrees to the same definitions, so that when you're having an important decision-making moment, you can all at least agree that you're on the same page?
Yes, great. This actually leads to my next question. Thank you. So kind of following up on our conversations and your work on responsible AI and the role of ethics now in product teams. When I think about my experience and the experience of my team, I don't know if anyone has a background in ethics. So what do we do when we want to invite a conversation? Like, how do we hire an ethicist?
Great question.
How do we get started with that?
I want to be kind of inclusive of that question to everybody in the room. Not everybody has the same level of resources that a Google or a Meta or has. And so how do you bring ethics into the room, or ethical leaning thinking into the room, when you don't have those resources? It depends on the scenario, what the product is, who the audience is, how big the audience is, how you need to make those decisions. Ethics and ethical thinking is not a one-size-fits-all. So trying to come up with a standardized guidelines for that is not really going to work well.
Right.
It's very much a scenario-based discussion. But what you can do is try and pull together a diverse group of people with different backgrounds, different levels of education, different skill sets and functions, and so on, and have them talk through a framework for values that you can hold yourself accountable to. I was very lucky to have access to the chief ethicist at Meta and worked with her pretty much every day. It was definitely an eye-opening experience. The thing with product design in general is, if you're, as a product designer in general, you're working on the UX UI, the decisions are already being made somewhere further up the food chain in terms of like the AI/ML model. And so you need to start to learn about those other aspects of what went into why is a certain recommendation or an outcome happening on the screen. And so starting to become familiar with those other functions, who makes those decisions, how they make those decisions, is something that is a learning journey for everyone.
I don't know if you guys agree, but I certainly think that there's an opportunity for user research, UX research, to be part of the conversation a little bit earlier in the life cycle of software development for AI? Because
right.
there are these very big implications for the user.
That's right. And we used to even bring in third-party, outside expertise, thought leaders, and even have other companies host discussions and workshops together so that we could have, unbiased discussions in the room. And so bringing in lots of outside communities to make decisions where there's, something significant that you're working on that might impact a large swath of society.
Oh, exciting.
Go ahead, Dave.
No, I was going to say, I think it's the time for user research to shine in this area. And, the irony of all this is like, we're talking a lot about like AI and technology, but the most important thing is human factors right now. And I think, what's actionable for researchers right now is, so many times researchers will do this like 20-page study and no one will read it, and it's like, it's frustrating, but there's just so much like, just implications we don't know, and you hear a lot of these, like even experts in AI talk about, we don't know what's going to happen, and just really understanding like what human sentiment is and like how do we design around that is going to be crucial. So I'm hoping, my hope is that research gets like a huge voice in like really like shaping not just the insights, but also like the strategy to this too.
Yeah, I agree. I think that where I see the real opportunity is thinking about in a world where the product is, powered or complemented with AI, what does the user experience need to be, right? So, I don't like situations where we kind of treat AI as this black box that is just going to automate a bunch of stuff on the side, right? It needs to be, it needs to kind of feed off of the users, and the users, provide direction and guidance to it, right? So having this human in the loop, sort of model, which is a term that you'll hear about, is really critical. But that requires a different way of operating, right? So if we take an example of you find a process that has 73 steps, and you find 5 part of those steps that could be automated with AI. Well, that's not the right way to do this, right? You may want to kind of take a step back and say, well, we need a new process, right? That doesn't have 73 steps. And, an AI could make recommendations along the way, and the user, the human, is the one that makes the final decisions and interacts with those recommendations along the way. So I think there's an opportunity to really take a step back, and that's where we need the designers and the researchers to really give that input in the room in the first place.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think this is a topic that we've all talked about, which is this idea of designing for, I'm going to coin the term human ability. So sort of designing what the best part of the human autonomous system or AI system, what the collaboration should be. And thinking about it as you were talking, I was thinking about how this technology is changing so quickly that you could come up with a design that could be quickly out of date. However, the thing that is not changing that rapidly are human needs and goals and pain points. So that might be sort of one area where you can nail down the design. But this does bring me to my next question, which is, in a landscape such as this, where there is so much change happening so rapidly, are there methods that you all are employing or frameworks for thinking about how to move forward in such a rapidly changing landscape?
Sure, I can take a stab at that. I think obviously staying up to date is a full-time job, right? We know that. But do we need to consume everything that is coming out? I think that the opportunity is to look at how new developments could mitigate risks, make life easier, make the development process, the design process easier. But it doesn't necessarily mean that what you've already done is a stale, right? So one of the things obviously that is critical is AI models live off of data, right? They need that data to stay up to date. So as your data changes, you do need to retrain, et cetera. But the fundamental design doesn't necessarily need to change. So you don't need to be trigger happy with new developments. But I think it's important to be aware of what's coming, and especially if there are areas where research shows that maybe there are gaps in things that you've implemented in the past. So how do we do this? Reading groups is a great idea in organizations. Subscribing to condensed blogs. I don't know, TLDR.ai or things like that is always a good way to have a finger on the pulse. And then kind of sharing amongst peers within the organization or outside the organization is always a good approach.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it'd be amazing, when we start thinking about like building for AI, is there like a W3 schools equivalent of it? Is there kind of more open standards that we're talking about? And a lot of it's still shaping up right now as we speak, right? And I think that's maybe why you asked the question. It's just like, it's so overwhelming to try and keep up with all this stuff. Like, stuff's probably changing right as we get off stage, and there's some technical breakthrough. And I think that's the thing, is just being able to be able to take in as much of it as you can, and then just through sharing things outwardly, the shared knowledge is really key. So when we're doing stuff at Replit, we want to share that more outward, get feedback, get thoughts, and even with the design community too, as we think about these areas. I think that's the pathway forward. Otherwise, it's a lot to read and get caught up on.
You mean instead of going developing in secret, waiting to release, only to find that you're outdated, sharing quickly?
Yes, and I think that plus being able to share how are other companies and other products thinking about it too. So you're kind of converging on an idea together, right? When there is a converging point. But I think that that kind of helps, so you're not just kind of building in a silo. Yeah.
That makes sense. Chris, you have thoughts?
Yeah, I have a few thoughts. If you're in a team that's working on 0 to 1, I recommend that you try and invite as many AI forward-thinking people into the room, even if they're not part of that team, to kind of be there and help guide you in those early brainstorms and tissue sessions. Especially policy and regulatory experts, in quote. I found that really effective because they can help creative teams and product teams think in a way that guides them, but doesn't quash their creative ambitions. And then if you're in a team that has already got an existing product, I think things like service design and design strategy can help. Obviously ethics, even anthropology, things like that aren't necessarily what you'd say is typical product design roles can help as well. Unpacking how a product works and figuring out all the steps that went into it and finding those places where things might have gone wrong or could be improved. That's something that all companies need to do, is continuously improve their operations. And so, yeah, I think you can, depending on the scenario, it's a different kind of team. I think the last thing I'll say is try and lean into the people who are really passionate about this, even if they don't know what they're talking about and they just are really interested in learning about AI. Build that community, have office hours, have open discussions, get them to participate, have them come to conferences like this so that they can start to be advocates in your own culture.
Yeah, great advice. I want to check the time really quick. Oh, perfect. So I think we're going to stop our questioning here, my questioning, and open it up to the audience. Where's that? How does this work?
There it is.
I don't want to throw that thing. I don't want to be. I don't want to go. I don't want to go to design jail. Okay, thank you, thank you. Okay, so who has?
So we have a question online. We'll start there.
Super.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Eva asked, yesterday I found out about a company that provides synthetic users based on AI to run user testing and interviews to validate ideas faster. I have my opinion on that, but I'd like to know if someone on the panel has some thoughts to share on this.
I definitely have thoughts on this. Yeah, that couldn't be worse than, I couldn't imagine a worse idea. Because it's bias on top of bias on top of bias. So how that original AI was trained to represent those people, that's a terrible idea. You need to go direct to the source and represent your audiences around the world and use them directly. So yeah, I think that's problematic.
I agree. Humans still matter.
There's a lot of risk.
We have a question over here.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Too far. That was an eye.
Hi, thanks so much. So, Chris, I really appreciate your focus on ethics, and I think this is what's weighing on me the most too, and the idea of bringing ethicists into the process. Do you think that that's really going to happen at most places, realistically speaking, or are they going to become like the lawyers that like everyone's like, oh, I guess you have to consult with legal on this,
Right?
and then they're just going to ignore them and do their own thing. So I guess my question is, how realistic do you think it is that ethicists will be a real part of our processes as we're developing this technology, and what do you think will happen if we don't include them?
That's a great question. I would say that for any stakeholder, any expert in a product team, it's always a tension of the shipping goals and the metrics versus what you hope to be the ideal solution. And so it's not easy, and I'm not going to lie, it's very challenging to kind of get ethical considerations into product roadmaps. So how do you do that? You have to start to train everybody to care about ethics. And so it becomes everybody's job to be responsible at a certain level. And so, that's where you start, is building those frameworks for, what should engineers care about? What should data scientists care about? What should product designers care about? And so on. And make everybody responsible slowly over time. If you don't do that, obviously there's going to be problems in the future with your product. I think trustworthiness will be a huge issue for your company and your brand. It'll be a matter of time before that becomes a public PR nightmare. And so it's better to lean in, but there will always be a challenge between measuring that ship goal versus do the right thing.
Can I add a thought to that too? I think, for me, I have this strong fundamental belief that like designers and researchers should get immersed in the stuff that feels kind of gross too, because of these implications. And it's just like an important thing to understand the work too, and like be able to advocate like that, because I hold the same like opinion you have too. It's like, if you have someone like talking about ethics, like our company, like, not like, there are going to be bad players out there too. So it's like, how do you do that? And I think that's why it's so important for, designers and researchers when there is kind of emerging tech to really understand what that means and have a strong voice for it too.
Can I just add one more thing? Most product teams are used to designing for the kind of core use case, and everybody's familiar with that, and they understand why the product feature is going to deliver against that. If you look at the edge cases sometimes at either end, that's where people haven't thought about, the product could go awry in this way, or it could be used in a less awesome way. And so grounding the team on a frequent basis in what those edge cases could be and how those might deliver harm is actually a good way to keep grounding people on, we're doing the right things on going after the big use cases, but we also need to make sure that we start to bring these other use cases in. And so the only way to do this is to build empathy for those edge cases where people, unfortunately, might not be well represented in the group.
I also want to add something here really quick. I can't remember if it's a conversation I had with one of you or all of the reading I've done in the past week, but in terms of testing what you're coming up with or the products that you're developing, I was reading something, or it came out of conversations with one of these guys about thinking through worst case scenarios.
That was me.
Okay, I think that's an excellent idea, right? Like, where could this go terribly wrong? like bring in the dystopian,
Yeah.
all the dystopian thinking.
The
Yeah.
tactic we use is called red teaming.
Yeah.
So blue team is like, let's think about the blue
Happy
sky, happy path, everything is amazing. The red teams take what that is on paper, what that product is on paper. Red teams are usually engineers who try and, attack a system, penetration tests and things like that. But red teams in design can be, how could this go horribly wrong? Like, how could this AI deviate from its intended purpose and hurt people in a different way? Or, how could it learn something new or be saturated with data that might change its outcomes?
It's like Jeff Goldblum's character in Jurassic Park, right?
Exactly, exactly. And it's actually a really fun and creative process. And oftentimes what happens is that you'll actually think through those things and then actually come up with new features as well. Or it'll at least help you prioritize the features that were in the original roadmap, because some of them might be weighted more to problematic issues.
Thank you. Finally, man, get in the box. So the question I have here is aligned to this topic about ethics, but I've been listening a lot as well about how maybe regulations and laws might be some adding to this topic in terms of setting the ground rules and also like guardrails to avoid this kind of issues. What are your thoughts on that topic?
Sure. I mean, obviously, probably most of us have heard about the Senate session yesterday. And the EU regulators are also thinking about this. So I think some regulation is necessary to make sure that the technology is not abused, and it's not misused, right? I think that will help. I don't necessarily think that that's a replacement for taking it upon yourself to kind of develop things responsibly, and kind of bring that sort of ethic and responsible AI mindset to your product development and design as well. But inevitably, the world is waking up to the possibility that, hey, we've got to live with more and more of this technology, and we need to kind of have some safeguards.
Brilliant. I think that actually brings us to time. So if everybody could give a round of applause for our panel.